Welcome to the 6 Ways to Sunday podcast, hosted by award-winning television director, documentary filmmaker, author, and speaker Craig D. Forrest. Join Craig for the next few minutes as he interviews leaders, artists, and creatives about trends and insights shaping our digital world and faith-based media. This podcast is produced and brought to you by Matchstick Media International. Now, here's Craig.
We're talking with Dr. Craig Detweiler, who is an author, filmmaker, cultural commentator. He's also a professor of communication and director of the Center for Entertainment, Media, and Culture at Pepperdine University in the lovely, lovely town of Malibu, California, on a campus that overlooks, it's got to be one of the most stunning views of any campus pretty much in the world. I mean, you drive down and there is the Pacific Ocean right in front of you. A great, great place to teach.
It's tough to have a hard day.
It's tough to have a hard day.
The worst day, you walk outside, you see the ocean, it wasn't that.
Exactly. It's still a good day when it's a bad day. So
That's
there you
right.
go. Talking to Craig Detweiler about culture, faith, media, and the church. In your book, iGods, one reviewer said there's basically two extremes. Do we succumb to the avalanche of media, or do we reject it outright? And what would you say to that, Craig?
Well, I want to live with both feet firmly planted in the time that I've been, raised. I want to engage with the tools, the issues, the possibilities of the day. So I want to be fully cognizant of how things work. And I also want to, I guess, maybe step outside of it long enough to have a sense of how things might be working me. I think about Facebook with the like button. It's interesting how everything you post on there, you kind of have to put into maybe positive terms so that somebody might like it. So even though it might say, please pray for my, grandma who's in the hospital, if the only option is like, it becomes very problematic, So it's sort of shifting how we ask for prayer or how we behave, having to always sort of put things into a positive, likable spin. And we don't think about that, the ways in which the code itself might be coding us to think or behave in certain ways. So I want us to be fully engaged with the tools of our time, aware of what they're doing and aware of what's possible, but also very, very, aware of what it might be subconsciously doing to us and through us.
When I go overseas, most of my media seminars, I'm teaching practical film, television, video, production principles, how to do short films, documentaries. And very rarely are there pastors in the workshops that I do. And I wish there were more. But they 90% of the time they'll send their staff or their teenage son or daughter to arrive. So the average age is about ages 15 to 25, 15 to 30. In my workshops. And I wish there was more leadership. If you were going to speak to leadership, whether it's United States or far away, what would you tell them, Craig, that they could or should know about media that can help them both in ministry and in the gospel?
Well, I appreciate the complexity of the job and the callings that they're fulfilling. It's very tough to care for congregations to respond to emergencies as they arise. So I understand why they might say, I don't have time for that. I've got to focus on the tasks at hand. But media can be a great multiplier of ministry, of impact. And so messages that you may be crafting for a Sunday, you can actually disseminate throughout the week in other formats, in other ways. You can be, as you might be doing research for a sermon and you come across a great quote. Well, why not tweet that quote out or put it out on Facebook for a group of your church members so that they can be pondering the same things that you're pondering. You can sort of take them on that discipleship journey with you in quick, simple, and electronic ways. So whether you have maybe a younger person in the church who's a little more media savvy, you can still be interacting with them about these texts, about these truths that you hope to disseminate. and you have a chance to really reach far beyond the actual walls of your church into this kind of electronic kingdom that does not know any borders whatsoever.
We're talking to media thought leader, filmmaker, and award-winning screenwriter Craig Detweiler on the podcast. Great conversation. We'll be back in 32 seconds after the break.
This podcast features engaging conversations with leaders, artists, and creatives sharing about current trends and insights shaping our digital world and faith-based media. Today's episode is produced by Matchstick Media International, a nonprofit that's passionate about inspiring both visionary leaders and young creatives to harness the power of media to further the gospel. To learn more, visit us at matchstickmedia.org. Now, back to Craig.
We're back having a wonderful conversation with Craig Detweiler, media thought leader, who has a lot to say about our digital world. Let's talk for a minute about convergence. I use that term sometimes when I speak, and people just have this puzzled look of, what are you talking about? But as a professor as well, I teach students where the majority of them do not watch television on a television. They watch it on their laptops or on a tablet. Mm-hmm. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, we used to be tied into particular times and particular places. And now, yeah, absolutely. My kids, they'll walk around the house with a tablet, watching Netflix, So the idea that TV used to sort of schedule us and tell us what was on and when has been completely flipped around. And so now everything is not necessarily about broadcasters pushing technology, but about the audiences pulling technology towards them, pulling programming and content towards them. And that's a big shift. The churches are still stuck in kind of a 11 a.m. Sunday time, which is not unlike, say, the nightly news or a weekly television broadcast. But people are now used to time shifting their life when it comes to entertainment. And I wonder to what degree we're suffering in churches from not being able to adjust to that shift and trying to say, you need to come to us on our schedule, when in fact in the rest of our life, we sort of decide when it's convenient for us to engage with the kind of content and information we seek. So if the church sees itself as an information dispensing unit, which I don't think it should, but to the degree our sermons are about like disseminating information or getting out a message, we may be falling into this trap between old media, which sets the time and schedule, and new media, which allows the audience to be in charge.
You bring up Netflix, and that immediately made me think, Craig, of a company that could have easily gone out of business if it had stuck with simply where they began, which was DVDs, which were quickly going away as a source of screening and presentation. And Netflix was smart enough to do two things that were very, very bold. One is they started doing screening on demand. You could just order it up and you can watch it. And the other thing that was even bolder, I think, in some respects, is they began creating their own programming rather than depending on everyone else bringing them programming. Talk about that for a minute.
Well, yes, the shifts in the media landscape have just been massive. And so you had, very well-established things like the newspaper business or the radio business in every market. You might have had two major newspapers, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. You might have had a certain amount of radio stations. And while there's plenty of bandwidth and people still listening, things crop up like Sirius or like Pandora or like Spotify, which have challenged that monopoly. And so Netflix, I think, understood that the old version of cable, sort of telling you these are the channels and this is the price, in the new media landscape, the internet allows everybody to kind of go over the top. You don't need a cable connection, or you don't need an antenna. You don't need a subscription even to maybe get your content. And so how do you distinguish yourself in a very, very crowded marketplace? And so you do need original content that people can't get anywhere else. And you need to make it readily accessible. It can't have technical glitches. It needs to be something that works, every time, and that is also tailored to people's tastes. So all of these things, unfortunately for a pastor, what you're seeing is that everyone is catering to people's tastes, and so everyone is used to being a consumer who is served by these media outlets. And so the church, which is calling people to serve, is now being put in the position of having to serve their constituency in a way that maybe they aren't used to, that shifts the power dynamic a little bit. And I think we're struggling to catch up and adjust to this new media model.
We've had a great conversation in this episode with Craig Detweiler about our digital world. We will be back in our next episode to continue this wonderful, wonderful talk. Hope to hear from you then. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the 6 Ways to Sunday podcast with Craig D. Forrest, brought to you by Matchstick Media International, dedicated to excellence in media through inspiration, vision, and education. To learn more, visit us on the web at matchstickmedia.org. That's matchstickmedia.org. Your generous donations, large or small, help defray costs for producing this creative podcast. Thanks for listening and subscribing.